A good musketman could get off 3 to 4 rounds per minute, or a shot every 15 seconds. The trouble now was that so many of the men, accustomed to firearms since childhood, used them any way they saw fit, almost any time they pleased, to start fires, for example, or blast away at wild geese. In order that officers could be distinguished from those in the ranks, Washington directed that major generals wear purple ribbons across their chests, brigadiers pink ribbons. Field officers were to be identified by different colored cockades in their hats. Sergeants were to tie a red cloth to their right shoulders. Washington himself chose to wear a light blue ribbon across his chest, between coat and waistcoat. But then there was never any mistaking the impeccably uniformed, commanding figure of Washington, who looked always as if on parade. The day he officially took command at Cambridge, July 3rd, had been marked by appropriate martial fanfare, a great deal of grandeur, as Lieutenant Hodgkins, the Ipswich cobbler, recorded. 1 and 20 drummers and as many fifers a-beating and playing round the parade ground. A young, newly arrived doctor from Barnstable, James Thatcher, assigned to the Army's hospital at Cambridge, described seeing the Commander-in-Chief for the first time. His Excellency was on horseback, in company with several military gentlemen. It was not difficult to distinguish him from all others. His personal appearance is truly noble and majestic, being tall and well-proportioned. His dress is a blue coat with buff-colored facings, a rich epaulet on each shoulder, buff underdress, and an elegant small sword, a black cockade in his hat. The great majority of the army were farmers and skilled artisans, shoemakers, saddlers, carpenters, wheelwrights, blacksmiths, coopers, tailors, and ship chandlers. Colonel John Glover's regiment from Marblehead, who were destined to play as important a part as any, were nearly all sailors and fishermen. It was an army of men accustomed to hard work being the common lot. They were familiar with adversity and making do in a harsh climate. Resourceful, handy with tools, they could drive a yoke of oxen or hove up a stump or tie a proper knot as readily as butcher a hog or mend a pair of shoes. They knew from experience, most of them, the hardships and setbacks of life. Preparing for the worst was second nature. Rare was the man who had never seen someone die. To be sure, an appreciable number had no trade. They were drifters, tavern lowlife some, the dregs of society. But by and large they were good, solid citizens, as worthy people as ever marched out of step, as would be said. Married men with families on whom they depended, and with whom they tried to keep contact as best they could. It was the first American army, and an army of everyone, men of every shape and size and makeup, different colors, different nationalities, different ways of talking, and all degrees of physical condition. Many were missing teeth or fingers, pitted by smallpox or scarred by past wars or the all-too-common hazards of life and toil in the 18th century. Some were not even men, but smooth-faced boys of 15 or less. One of the oldest, and by far the most popular, was General Israel Putnam, a hero of the Battle of Bunker Hill, who at 57 was known affectionately as Old Put. Rough, thick-set, all bones and muscles, and leathery, with flowing gray locks and a head like a cannonball, he was a Pomfret, Connecticut farmer who had survived hair-raising exploits fighting the French and Indians, shipwreck, even a face-to-face encounter with a she-wolf in her den, if the stories were to be believed. Old Put also spoke with a slight lisp and could barely write his name. But as said, Old Put feared nothing. At the other extreme was little Israel Trask, who was all of 10. Like the son of Lieutenant Jabez Fitch, Israel had volunteered with his father, Lieutenant Jonathan Trask of Marblehead, and served as messenger and cook's helper. John Greenwood, a fifer, one of the more than 500 fifers and drummers in the army, was 16, but small for his age and looked younger. Born and raised in Boston, he had grown up with the Troubles always close to home. A young apprentice living in his house had been one of those killed in the Boston Massacre. Thrilled by the sound of the fifes and drums of the regulars occupying the city, John had somehow acquired an old split fife, upon which, after puttying up the crack, he learned to play several tunes before being sent to live with an uncle in Falmouth, Portland, Maine. In May 1775, hearing the news of Lexington and Concord, he had set off on foot with little more than the clothes on his back, his fife protruding from a front pocket. All alone he walked to Boston, 150 miles, through what was still, much of the route, uninhabited wilderness. Stopping at wayside taverns where troops were gathered, he would bring out the fife and play a tune or two, as he would later recall. They used to ask me where I came from and where I was going to, and when I told them I was going to fight for my country, they were astonished such a little boy and alone should have such courage.
Thus, by the help of my fife, I lived, as it were, on what is usually called free quarters, nearly upon the entire route. After reaching the army encampments, he was urged to enlist with the promise of $8 a month. Later, passing through Cambridge, he learned of the battle raging at Bunker Hill. Wounded men were being laid out on the common. Everywhere the greatest terror and confusion seemed to prevail. The boy started running along the road that led to the battle, past wagons carrying more casualties and wounded men struggling back to Cambridge on foot. Terrified, he wished he had never enlisted. I could positively feel my hair stand on end. But then he saw a lone soldier coming down the road. A Negro man, wounded in the back of his neck, passed me, and, his collar being open and he not having anything on except his shirt and trousers, I saw the wound quite plainly and the blood running down his back. I asked him if it hurt him much, as he did not seem to mind it. He said no, that he was only to get a plaster put on it and meant to return. You cannot conceive what encouragement this immediately gave me. I began to feel brave and like a soldier from that moment, and fear never troubled me afterward during the whole war. In response to concerns in Congress over how much of the Army was in fact made up of old men and boys, as well as Negroes and Indians, General William Heath reported, "There are in the Massachusetts regiments some few lads and old men, and in several regiments some Negroes. Such is also the case with the regiments from the other colonies. Rhode Island has a number of Negroes and Indians. The New Hampshire regiments have less of both." General John Thomas, who commanded the Massachusetts troops at Rosebury, also responded, "The regiments at Rosebury, the privates, are equal to any I served with in the last war. Very few old men, and in the ranks very few boys. Our fifers are many of them boys. We have some Negroes, but I look upon them in general equally serviceable with other men for fatigue and inaction. Many of them have proven themselves brave." Like most Southerners, Washington did not want blacks in the Army, and would soon issue orders saying that neither Negroes, boys unable to bear arms, nor old men were to be enlisted. By year's end, however, with new recruits urgently needed and numbers of free blacks wanting to serve, he would change his mind and in a landmark general order authorize their enlistment. While no contemporary drawings or paintings of individual soldiers have survived, a fair idea of how they looked emerges from the descriptions in notices posted of deserters. One George Reynolds of Rhode Island, as an example, was 5 feet 9 inches tall, age 17, and carried his head something on his right shoulder. Thomas Williams was an immigrant, an old countryman who spoke good English and had a film in his left eye. David Relf, a saucy fellow, was wearing a white coat, jacket and breeches, and ruffled shirt when last seen. Deserted from Colonel Brewer's regiment and Captain Harvey's company, set a notice in the Essex, Connecticut Gazette. One Simeon Smith of Greenfield, a joiner by trade, a thin, spared fellow, about 5 feet 4 inches high, had on a blue coat and black vest, a metal button on his hat, black long hair, black eyes, his voice in the hermaphrodite fashion, the masculine rather predominant. Likewise, Matthias Smith, a small, smart fellow, a saddler by trade, gray-headed, has a younger look in his face, is apt to say, I swear, and between his words will spit smart, had on a green coat and an old red greatcoat. He is a right gamester, although he wears something of a sober look. Likewise, John Davy, a long hump-shouldered fellow, a shoemaker by trade, drawls his words, and for comfortable says comfortable. He had a green coat, thick leather breeches, slim legs, lost some of his 4 teeth. For every full-fledged deserter, there were a half-dozen others inclined to stroll off on almost any pretext, to do a little clam-digging perhaps, or who might vanish for several weeks to see wives and children, help with the harvest at home, or ply their trades for some much-needed hard money. Sometimes they requested a furlough. As often, they just up and left, only to come straggling back into camp when it suited them. It was not that they had no heart for soldiering, or were wanting in spirit. They simply had had little experience with other people telling them what to do every hour of the day.
Having volunteered to fight, they failed to see the sense in a lot of fuss over rules and regulations. It was midsummer by the time the first troops from outside New England began showing up. Companies of riflemen from Pennsylvania, Maryland, and Virginia. Hardy men, many of them exceeding 6 feet in height, noted Dr. James Tatcher, who was himself short and slight. One Virginia company, led by Captain Daniel Morgan, had marched on a beeline for Boston, covering 600 miles in 3 weeks, or an average of 30 miles a day in the heat of summer. Mostly backwoodsmen of Scotch-Irish descent, they wore long fringed hunting shirts, rifle shirts of homespun linen in colors ranging from undyed tan and gray to shades of brown and even black. These tied at the waist with belts carrying tomahawks. At a review, they demonstrated how, with their long-barreled rifles, a frontier weapon made in Pennsylvania and largely unknown in New England, they could hit a mark 7 inches in diameter at a distance of 250 yards, while the ordinary musket was accurate at only 100 yards or so. It was rifling, spiraled grooves inside the long barrel, that increased the accuracy, and the new men began firing at British sentries with deadly effect until the British caught on and kept their heads down or stayed out of range. Welcome as they were at first, the riflemen soon proved even more indifferent to discipline than the New Englanders, and obstreperous to the point that Washington began to wish they had never come. Work on defenses went on steadily, the troops toiling with picks and shovels in all weather, sometimes working through the night when the heat of day was too severe. It was endless brute labor, but they were remarkably proficient at it, far more so than their British counterparts. As the size and reach of the defenses increased, visitors by the hundreds came to see for themselves. Roads were crowded with spectators to whom the giant ramparts were wondrous works. Nothing on such scale had ever been built by New Englanders before. Breastworks in many places 17 feet in thickness, trenches wide and deep. Verily, their fortifications appeared to be the works of 7 years. The work parties were fired on from time to time. British and American sentries alike were fired on repeatedly. On August 2nd, as Lieutenant Samuel Bixby of Connecticut recorded in his diary, one of Gen Washington's riflemen was killed by the regulars today and then hung up by the neck. His comrades, seeing this, immediately asked leave of the general to go down and do as they pleased. The riflemen marched immediately and began operations. The regulars fired at them from all parts with cannon and swivels, but the riflemen skulked about and kept up their sharp shooting all day. Many of the regulars fell, but the riflemen lost only one man. Both sides staged sporadic night raids on the other's lines, or launched forays to capture hay and livestock from nearby harbor islands. The night of August 30th, the British made a surprise breakout at the Neck, set fire to a tavern, and withdrew back to their defenses. The same night, 300 Americans attacked Lighthouse Island, killed several of the enemy, and took 23 prisoners, with the loss of one American soldier. Night was the time for frolicking, remembered John Greenwood, the fifer, as the British were constantly sending bombs at us, and sometimes from 2 to 6 at a time could be seen in the air overhead, looking like moving stars in the heavens. Some early morning British bombardments lasted several hours, the British clearly having no shortage of powder. In one furious cannonade from the British works on Bunker Hill, a rifleman lost a leg, and a company clerk with Nathaniel Greene's Kentish Guards, Augustus Mumford, had his head blown off. Mumford was the first Rhode Island casualty of the war, and the horror of his death moved Nathaniel Greene as nothing had since the siege began. To his wife Katie, who was pregnant with their first child, Greene wrote that he wished she could be spared such news and any fears she had for his own safety. British deserters kept crossing the lines, usually at night and alone, but sometimes 3 or 4 together. Half-starved and disgruntled, they came from both Boston and from the British ships in harbor, and nearly always with bits of news or descriptions of their travails, word of which would spread rapidly through the camps the next day. One night, a lone British light horseman swam his horse across. Another night, 15 men deserted the ships in the harbor. Then days would follow without incident, one day like another. An officer with a company of Pennsylvania riflemen wrote of nothing to do but pick blueberries and play cricket.
Nothing of note, nothing important, all quiet, Lieutenant Bixby of Connecticut recorded. On the other side, a British diarist drearily echoed the same refrain, writing, "Nothing extraordinary, nothing extraordinary, day after day." Washington kept expecting the British to attack and failed to understand why they would delay if an end to the rebellion was what they wanted. By the close of summer, with increasing losses from disease, desertions, and absences of one sort or other, his army was in serious decline. Spirits suffered. The patriotic fervor that had sent thousands rushing to the scene in late April and May was hardly evident any longer. It was not just that the army was shrinking. It was due to disappear entirely in a matter of months, the troops having signed on to serve only until the end of the year. The Connecticut enlistments would be up even sooner. It had been the common expectation that the rising of such an armed force as gathered outside Boston would cause the British to think again and reach an accommodation. A short campaign had been anticipated by nearly everyone, including Washington, who had told his wife he would be home by fall. There were still too few tents, still a shortage of blankets and clothing, and no one had forgotten that winter was on the way. Farmers and soldiers knew about weather. Weather could be the great determiner between failure and success, the great test of one's staying power. In truth, the situation was worse than they realized, and no one perceived this as clearly as Washington. Seeing things as they were,
and not as he would wish them to be, was one of his salient strengths. He knew how little money was at hand, and he understood, as did no one else, the difficulties of dealing with Congress. He knew how essential it was to the future effectiveness of the army to break down regional differences and biases among the troops. But at the same time, he struggled with his own mounting contempt for New Englanders. Writing to Lund Washington, a cousin and his business manager at home at Mount Vernon, he railed against the Yankees as exceeding dirty and nasty, nothing like what he had expected. He had only contempt for these people, he confided in a letter to Congressman Richard Henry Lee, another fellow Virginian. The heart of the problem was an unaccountable kind of stupidity in the lower class of these people, which, believe me, prevails but too generally among the officers, who are nearly of the same kidney with the privates. All such officers desired was to curry favor with the men and thereby get re-elected. Still, he allowed, if properly led, the army would undoubtedly fight. And in a letter to General Philip Schuyler, who was in command at Albany, Washington insisted, possibly to rally his own resolve, that they must never lose sight of the goodness of our cause. Difficulties were not insurmountable. Perseverance and spirit have done wonders in all ages.